Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red. I am joined virtually by Nizar Hassan. Nizar, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
As good as can be expected. I guess we're all sort of like in our own homes. We're not together as we usually are. So this is going to be like a really strange podcast, I guess, because we're using a new technology. The quality might dip a little bit, the audio quality. Just because we don't have our normal recording studio and equipment and everything like that. But having said that, I'm here at home. I'm joined by Nizar, of course, and we have a very special guest / third host this week, the one and only Timour Azhari. Timour, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, trying to stay sane.
Yeah. We are in the midst of a lockdown here in Lebanon because of the coronavirus, of course. So each of us is sitting at home and we're talking over computers, and our producer, Susan, is in a fourth location recording all of this. So we have no idea how this is exactly going to work, but please bear with us over the next few minutes because we've got a whole lot to talk about this week. Starting out, first off, of course, just with the coronavirus. As of right now, we're recording this on Sunday morning, and as of right now, there have been 230 total cases, and this number jumped up enormously just yesterday. 67 new cases were confirmed just yesterday. Also, since we came to you last 2 weeks ago, Lebanon has seen its first death due to coronavirus, and there have been 4 of those so far.
And yeah, one interesting fact is that among the people who tested positive for coronavirus is Mohammed Safadi, the person who was kind of half nominated to be prime minister, or very widely discussed to be the next prime minister when we were in the phase before Hassan Diab's government. So his wife, Violette Safadi Khairallah, she said that he tested positive, but she's so far tested negative. But she's optimistic that he will be recovering, etc. But it's one of the few cases of famous people in Lebanon getting coronavirus, because I'm seeing all of this news about U.S. celebrities and things like that.
It's pretty much the first prominent person in Lebanon to get the coronavirus. So Mohammed Safadi is basically our Idris Elba. And yeah. And so basically this sort of like where we are at now, we're basically a month after we had our first case in Lebanon on February 21st. It's climbed up really like exponentially over the past couple of days. And we're about a week now after this sort of general mobilization was declared. So since the beginning of the month, we had schools closed, we had restaurants and bars and clubs starting to close, which many people on Twitter made the easy point that, oh my God, the clubs are closing in Lebanon. This means it's really, really serious.
Right.
And so that started happening before. And then on last Sunday, we basically had this decision to basically announce sort of a state of emergency, like a state of medical emergency is what they termed it, and a general mobilization, which basically means that the government and the security forces are sort of empowered to enforce control over energy resources, regulate their distribution. They can control like raw materials, industrial production. It's basically like a state of war, more or less.
Right, exactly. Although there's a lot of confusion surrounding that what is actually legally allowed and what is not due to a general mobilization. There are mentions of it both in the Constitution and in the laws, but there's one part that's really kind of vague. It talks about confiscation of persons and funds, stuff like that, which may require an actual state of emergency, which is a separate thing to be declared. And it's possible that this could be happening as early as today. Cabinet's supposed to meet today to discuss further measures to be taken. Because like you said, this general mobilization was announced last Sunday. And then just last night, after we saw this real big spike in cases yesterday, the Prime Minister Hassan Diab came out and basically did everything that he could by himself without a new cabinet decree, and really urged people to stay home, because even though these places were closed, a lot of people were still going out into public over the past week. And he came out last night and said, please don't do that. And also, we're going to be using the security forces, the army, the ISF, etc., to ensure that people stay home and are not going out.
One interesting thing about this whole issue of, state of emergency or not is that actually people were kind of demanding a state of emergency, like random people that I'm like, just me watching social media behavior, not really a big sociological study, but like I saw a lot of people being really excited about state of emergency, not excited in the positive term, but kind of calling for it and saying, it's a shame that the government hasn't declared one yet. It's just a whole mess. I feel like we've entered this period where we're trying to blame the government for the wrong things. Like there are so many important things they're not doing. The state of emergency is not one of them. You know what I mean? But there was this whole thing where actually the government is under pressure from certain people who are opposed to it or who are part of the uprising, etc., to declare a state of emergency. We don't need a state of emergency in this case. Like you don't have martial law, you don't have the army ruling or whatever. You don't go around confiscating people and their possessions at this stage at all. So I don't know why you need a state of emergency.
Yeah, and not to mention that a state of emergency confers really a whole lot more powers on a government. So if they declare a state of emergency, not only can they do certain things like, taking people into custody or confiscating their finances or forcing them to do something, in the laws, they have a number of other powers, including things like regulating the press and things as silly as even down to like plays in theaters they can oversee. So really a state of emergency is probably the broadest possible authority that the government could grant itself.
And although today it does seem like, the sort of what we're seeing on the streets of Lebanon today is looking a bit more like what a real state of emergency would look like. So since last night, we've had like army, security forces, general security deployed in the streets. Today, there was a helicopter flying around the coast, maybe even more than one helicopter, based on local news reports, basically like telling people to stay home. They were using like loudspeakers from the helicopters flying at a low altitude and basically like telling people to stay home. And you had soldiers doing the same in Hamra, just walking through the street, telling people to stay home. And so it's like they really are trying to, tighten these measures. Anecdotally, I can let you know that, so yesterday I drove north and was trying to drive through Anfe, and they had, like the municipal police had blocked off Anfe entirely. Like they did not let me in. They said it's basically only for inhabitants. I just wanted to like fuel. And they said, no, sorry, you can't come in. And I'm really like wondering about the legality of that. But what really has happened is that the government has empowered security forces and local authorities, so that includes municipalities, to basically take matters into their own hands a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, these measures aren't just happening for the general populace. We also had news this past week coming out of the prisons in Lebanon, because a lot of prisoners are very, very concerned about the conditions that they're being held in might make them susceptible to getting coronavirus if it spreads to the prison population. And so this past week we saw a lot of prisoners protesting, in some cases even rioting, saying, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't hold us in these conditions. This is not right."
Yeah, I mean, the prisons are already a big mess when you look at how overcrowded. We're talking about Rumi prison here. Rumi, north of Beirut, is the biggest prison. It has almost half of the prisoners, around 3,500 prisoners. And this is like 2,000 people over its capacity. So what you have is basically rooms overstacked, like with the prisoners. You have 5, 4, 6, 8 people in the same room. What this means is basically once one of them gets corona, that's it. You have a whole prison population with corona, more or less.
This is a potential disaster waiting to happen here.
Yeah, and this is more than all of the prison population gets corona, apart from all the complications. Basically, the whole prison would be turned into a hospital to be able to treat them, and it wouldn't be possible even logistically. But apart from that, you have more, like this is more than all of the other cases that we've had so far. Like this would be a real disaster in all senses. And anyway, what we have heard from the prisoners is that the security guards or the prison guards are not doing what they have to do in order to protect the prison from being infected with corona. Basically, they're not taking the precautions of, wearing gloves or masks or sanitizing themselves and things regularly so that, corona doesn't infiltrate into the prison. And this is what basically they're protesting about. But all of this isn't resolved unless, the basic problem is resolved, which is just like having humane conditions where people have some distance between them and they're not, stuck with 6 people in one little room.
Cabinet actually took a decision to release some prisoners earlier this week, but it would only really affect, from numbers that the Bar Association provided, about 120 prisoners. So the decision was to release prisoners who were basically being held because they completed their sentences but haven't paid fines. And these fines are in the, between 7 to 15 million lira, which is about, I don't know, really depends on the exchange rate you're using, but anywhere from $20,000 to $6,000. Okay, that's a gross, that's a joke. It's we don't know with the exchange rates today what it actually is, but so it's when you're talking about a prison population of about 7,000 in prisons and 3,000 in held in smaller jails, 120 people being released isn't all too much, especially when you have basically thousands of people held for petty crimes, drug possession, things like that. Hospital readiness, we now have numbers at 15 hospitals, private hospitals that is, are prepped to take corona patients. It's sort of like slowly ramped up over the past month. In the beginning, there was a lot of criticism that private hospitals weren't sort of carrying the weight in this crisis. And most hospitals in Lebanon are private. It's just something that's happened in the hospital sector since the civil war as it was rebuilt. And many people at hospitals in Lebanon haven't gone paid for a long time, including at private and public hospitals. And so we had a strike at Rafiq Hariri University Hospital, which is the heart of coronavirus treatment in Lebanon. Basically, administrative staff went on strike because they were saying, like, look, we're putting our lives in danger, but we haven't been paid in months. I believe some of these people haven't been paid in years, and yet they're on the front lines of this battle when they should probably be being paid bonuses, but they still aren't being paid.
Yeah, and this is a sort of a general problem that has been going on at this hospital for years, as long as I can remember, of staff just not getting paid chronically. And this is not some like tiny side hospital off in the woods. This is Beirut General Hospital, basically. This is the main public hospital in Beirut, and it's been leading on point during the COVID-19 outbreak. So this is while the strike didn't affect, the people who were working on the coronavirus, they weren't going on strike, but the two are connected. And here we start to see again, sort of like this, years and years and years of underinvestment and not paying people properly. And what happens? You have a crisis where at this very hospital, this hospital really needs to be on the ball, leading the charge, but it's suffering because of just years and years of poor decisions by the government and administrations.
It's basically just literally austerity. I mean, I was talking to one of our comrades who is one of the workers who went on strike. She works at Rafiq Hariri, and she was telling me that there are hours that they have worked before and they weren't paid for. There is the ranks and salary scale, the wage hike for the public sector workers, which for some reason didn't apply to them, and they want it paid to them in retrospectively. They have lost some of their health insurance, like their official health insurance that they get from the state, from the National Social Security Fund. Some of it doesn't apply to them, like the health part anymore. It's just absolutely insane. It's as if the state is trying to kind of strangle this hospital into complete collapse. It's just austerity done in the worst kind of way.
And there's supposedly just some like positive things, which is Ojero, cabinet basically decided that because everyone's staying home and to encourage people to stay home, they would double the speed of internet for Ojero subscribers. That's the official state-run internet provider. I'm somewhere where, we have Ojero. I can tell you that it has not gotten faster. I think that probably with all these people staying home, the best we can hope for is for it to break even. And then we also have all these private donations, because this sector is so underfunded, or Lebanon is already dealing with these myriad crises where we have a medical supply shortage. We've had a lot of people come out and, sort of donate on like these like live TV shows or straight to the Red Cross. including politicians. I think Najib Miati donated something around 40 million Lebanese lira or $40,000. I'm not sure. But either way, this guy is like the richest man in Lebanon, a multi-billionaire, also accused of like rampant corruption, and donating that small amount. I don't know. It came across as
Man, the Association of Banks donated something.
$6 million.
There was a serial harasser / rapist who went on TV also and donated. I mean, it was kind of the worst people in the country who were just like, yeah, I'm giving money. I'm so good. Everyone will love me now. And a lot of positive interaction with them on Twitter, at least. That's what I saw, which is quite, frustrating.
Yeah, it really was kind of amazing to see these people who, in a lot of cases, these are politicians who have voted year in and year out to sort of like underfund these services. And now they're coming out and saying, oh, well, we're not going to fix anything structurally here, but privately, I'm going to give this tiny amount of my own vast personal fortune, so that just to help alleviate some problems and generate some positive press. And yes, it seems to have worked to a certain degree, but also there was a backlash of people saying, "Come on, this is all you're doing. You're a politician, or you're a billionaire, or you're a multimillionaire, and this is all you're doing to help Lebanon through this crisis."
Yeah, exactly. That's a big problem. Like, we don't need your charity. We just needed good policies, and you just gave us fucked up policies, and now you give us some petty charity. We don't need that.
Exactly. So what we're expecting here over the next week, I mean, obviously things seem to have taken off. Yesterday, we're probably going to see larger numbers of cases than we saw over the past few weeks being announced. And that means probably like potentially a long lockdown. Oh, by the way, I see the helicopter. It is going past my place right now as we speak. Yeah, they're broadcasting something. I can't make it out. Yeah, so we're potentially on lockdown for a long time, maybe not just weeks, maybe months, maybe longer, just like people around the world are looking at. Things seem to be getting worse in terms of the transmission here in Lebanon and what we know about the transmission here. This is all also on top of, a financial and economic collapse that we've been covering extensively on this podcast. One thing that we are not expecting here, as opposed to, say, in the United States or something, is the government to directly be paying people or giving some sort of cash disbursements or anything like that. Because the government is broke, that just seems to be not on the cards.
And there's also the potential for a baby boom in 9 months with all these people staying home, or an increase in the divorce rate. I mean, who knows? It could really go any way. I think we're all sort of figuring this out and getting real close to our significant others.
Yeah.
I totally agree. But commenting on the financial assistance point, to be honest, the government hasn't announced any measures that would protect people in terms of livelihood, like socioeconomically, in any way, since the corona basically panic began, or the crisis. The first speech and the second speech, you didn't hear Diab mentioning any policies. I mean, the first one, okay, I would expect it to be still, under consideration what kind of things they might want to do. But in the second one, he didn't even mention it. He didn't say we're trying to come up with a plan to support the unemployed or release some of the housing debt, etc., that people have. I don't know, basic things, delay, postpone loan payments, things like that. They didn't mention anything, and I don't know if they're going to do it anytime soon. But we're talking about a situation with really extreme, not extreme, but you're talking about 40% of the population probably being under the higher poverty line, and a lot of people relying on informal employment, which means that if they don't work, they don't get paid. And it's not like in specific sectors, it's all over the country. In most sectors, people have informal contracts or informal work status. So a lot of people now are basically looking to the next, month or two and saying, okay, I have absolutely no way of making ends meet next month or the month after, and the government is not doing anything yet about it. So they will not be able to control Corona seriously for the next few months if they don't announce any serious assistance plans or any measures to respond to that.
Yeah, and just to give everybody an update on what the economic situation is right now, there still is a sort of ongoing crackdown by authorities on the currency exchangers, right? They're supposed to be exchanging at 2,000 lira to the dollar but that is not the market price whatsoever. A lot of exchanges are either closed or not selling dollars, or operating at the 2000 mark officially, but then under the table operating at a different rate. There were reports on Friday of rates up to 2,750 lira to the dollar. I personally recently found an exchange that was, quietly buying dollars for 2,500. So the real rate is far above the official, 1,500, obviously, or the 2,000 other semi-official rate. As far as banks go, we had a lot of troubling news this past week. The banks are largely shut as of right now. They've got a few branches open, but a lot of them have sort of halted USD withdrawals. And of course, most people's accounts are in US dollars here. And so banks have been slowly turning off the tap of what these people can withdraw from their accounts. And now finally, we've seen that some banks have turned it off completely now, unless you have one of these fresh money accounts where you brought US dollars into the country after the capital controls were put into place by banks.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about the banks, as usual, is that they think they're the highest authority in Lebanon, and they released their statements stating, the new measures before the cabinet kind of announced its new measures. It's such a weird thing. They released a statement, I think, few hours before Diab went up and made the first big speech.
This was a week ago, last Sunday, right? Yeah,
announcing the mobilization. Yeah,
announcing the general mobilization. And there was this weird exchange between a journalist and the defense, the information minister, who was basically announcing the decisions. And the information minister told her, "Yeah, I don't know why the banks made that decision to close their doors before we made our decision, not to kind of force them to have a shutdown. So the government does not want the banks to shut down. This was not part of the government's decisions." And yet the banks decided that. It's basically the same thing that happened when the uprising started and the bank said, "Oh no, we can't operate anymore." And they shut down for 3 weeks. And then after those 3 weeks, there was a run on dollars that was insane. The banks really are always kind of taking measures just without consulting, or maybe consulting under the table, but without kind of obeying what the general population is, where the general population is heading. And that's very, very dangerous, and for the rest of us.
Yeah, it was really strange because basically the statement seemed to have been leaked from the Association of Banks before cabinet, announced the state of general mobilization or whatever it is, and then the Association of Banks backpedaled a little bit and said, "Oh, actually no, we're just gonna close some branches and open others, but we're going to be closed tomorrow," and that was Monday. And then on Monday they released a statement saying, "Oh no, actually we're going to be closed until the end of the month." And then you have this sort of the finance minister come out and say, "No, you guys can't do this," and he urges public prosecutors to take action against the banks because they're literally defying the cabinet order. And then they basically later have a meeting and sort of chum it out, and the banks kind of decide to open, although it's unclear to me now exactly in what capacity they're open. They're not completely open. It's still some branches.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, all of this just speaks to the general state of insolvency in the banking sector right now. A lot of these banks, the reason they don't want to open up isn't really because of coronavirus. It's because they don't want depositors coming and demanding their money. So they'll use any sort of excuse that they can get their hands on in order to close. But that's sort of this is what's happening right now. But the underlying issue here of the problems in the banking sector, that's also a really huge topic of conversation, and what to do with the banks, how to reach solvency again, right? How do we do this? And on that front, there was an article in the Financial Times this week that was extensively interviewing the finance minister, Ghazi Wazni. And it was basically about how to restructure the banking sector, right? And Wazni said that they're looking at a whole range of options, and those would include bail-ins, where maybe you're depositor and you're going to, instead of getting that money back, those deposits or a portion of those deposits will be exchanged for equity in the bank. So you'll become a shareholder instead of a depositor in the bank. They're looking at freezing dollar accounts for 6 years. They're looking potentially also at the creation of some sort of state asset fund that depositors would have to buy into. And this was a really interesting article, and Wozni himself was tweeting out portions of the article from his Twitter account, right? But then apparently this caused somebody to be unhappy. So Wozni later tweeted a sort of denial in Arabic, saying, no, I want to protect depositors. That's job number one. But what was said in the article was actually pretty eye-opening, and a lot of people, there was a severe backlash, I would say, from a lot of quarters on Twitter, from the nerds, the finance nerds, for instance, on Twitter, pointing out things that, oh, well, if you create a state asset fund, and force depositors to buy into that, basically what you're doing is you're privatizing all of these state assets, and you're just giving them to the richest people who have the most deposits, which is an insane way of fixing this problem.
Yeah, but that's what happens when you answer to the Hadley Gamble kind of questions of why haven't you privatized yet? This is the neoliberal framework of policy making. The question of why not
Hadley Gamble, the CNBC correspondent.
Yeah, I'm referring to her because once she was interviewing Saad al-Hariri just before he resigned, and she was like, privatization. Why haven't you privatized yet? Let's privatize. And basically half of the interview was basically just taking privatization as the self-evident, inevitable choice and asking Hariri, why haven't you done it yet? Because it's so great. And it's known to be kind of one of the main policies that a lot of the institutions working in this framework, especially the IMF and the World Bank, kind of recommend to countries that are in similar economic situations, and in situations especially when they need aid, financial assistance from abroad. They say, just privatize your state assets because that way you can make a lot of money in the short term. But in this case, it's about actually private money being turned into ownership of public assets. So that's money you had in the bank. And the crazy thing about it is that that's money you invested in this dead account in the bank because you wanted to make extreme interest rates probably. And, you knew that there was a risk involved there. So when this risk actually realized, we're going to give you the properties of the state. No, this doesn't make any sense. This is ethically wrong. Give them shares in the banks, I don't care, but don't give them state assets.
Speaking of the IMF, because you mentioned that, we also had, there's, the other continuing conversation other than how to restructure the banks is, well, are we going to ask the IMF for help or not? And Nasrallah has spoken a couple times since we last came to you. In his comments last week, he actually said, we're not opposed. Hezbollah is not opposed to having an IMF program per se, but we just don't want, the strings attached. We want to do it in a way that is favorable to Lebanon, not to Washington.
Yeah, basically saying we don't want any political conditions for it. This is why Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, the kind of the deputy leader of Hezbollah, has already said that that they oppose this program, and they set the tone. And everyone is now, when they're discussing IMF, everyone's now saying, it might happen, but Hezbollah is the obstacle. So Nasrallah was kind of lifting this blame or this responsibility off of Hezbollah's shoulders, saying, we're not totally or fundamentally opposed to the IMF. Basically, they're not opposed to the IMF for the reasons that I, for example, would be opposed to them. They're opposing them because they suspect that it's going to come with a lot of political conditions because, of the American administration's influence on the IMF, especially when it comes to Hezbollah and how they can restrict Hezbollah's funds or margin of operation, etc. But and Nasrallah's phrasing kind of supports this theory because he said, as long as the conditions don't contradict with Lebanon's constitution, I don't know what that really means, except if it has actual political content.
The thing about the way Hezbollah is dealing with this here, I think is kind of interesting to me because Hezbollah's whole thing is that we aren't involved in the corruption and the mismanagement that destroyed the state. We were busy fighting Israel, and then now we've suddenly woken up and seen that Lebanon is fucked, and now we have to deal with it. And so Hezbollah here basically is saying okay, yeah, sure, we would like the benefits of an IMF program, and maybe we see that we need a foreign injection of money basically to salvage things. But at the same time, they're saying, oh yeah, but we oppose a raise in the VAT from 15 to 20%, or we oppose any sort of painful measures. And so I think it's Hezbollah like basically, trying to manage this image of itself as like, basically Hezbollah here can say like, we weren't involved in the past destruction of the state's finances. And so sure, we'd like to fix it, but we're not going to see it fixed, basically on the people's back. And so they're kind of playing between those two points, the need for salvation, but also their need to maintain their image as like the sort of political force that's above the daily meddling and corruption of everyone else.
Yeah, precisely. All right, one other thing that we've got to discuss this week, the Amer Fakhoury scandal that unfolded before our eyes. On Thursday, we were treated to pictures of this gigantic American Osprey plane, tilt rotor aircraft, coming and flying into the U.S. Embassy just up above Beirut and then taking off again. And this apparently, Amer Fakhoury was aboard that aircraft. The Americans basically spirited him out of the country following another really big thing that happened earlier in the week. On Monday, he was basically released. He was the military tribunal threw out his case.
So Amer Fakhoury is a former member of the South Lebanon Army, which is an Israeli proxy that basically helped occupy South Lebanon from 1982 to 2000. And during his time with the SLA, Amer Fakhoury was a commander at the Khiam prison, the notorious Khiam prison, through which thousands of Lebanese went over, nearly 2 decades. All kinds of brutal torture took place there. Electrical cables, putting in people in small cages. Fakhoury apparently oversaw this and basically oversaw the torture of thousands of people. Fakhoury settled in the States and recently received Lebanese citizenship. He came to Lebanon last September, somehow thinking he could just walk into the country. And he did, but then, news spread that he'd arrived and he was arrested. And then fast forward to Monday.
By the way, we did a whole episode about that. Episode 56 was about the South Lebanon Army and Fakhoury himself. So whatever background people need for this story, it's there.
Yeah. So on Monday, what happened is the military tribunal said, "Oh, okay, well, actually, all the statute of limitations has been reached on all of this stuff, so you're free to go." And they released him. And then he was gone. And then and then I believe the next day, either Tuesday or Wednesday, a judge slapped a travel ban on him and said, wait, you can't go anywhere yet. But then on Thursday, we were all treated to these just stunning scenes of the Americans spiriting him away. And it was later confirmed. President Donald Trump came out and thanked the Lebanese authorities for working with the Americans. So basically indicting our leaders here in Lebanon that they were collaborating to, break the ruling from this judge saying you can't travel and to give Amer Fakhoury back to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the decision to to release him was based on the idea that a lot of years have passed since the crime was committed. He's being prosecuted for crimes that happened, 30 and 20 years ago. So after the passage of 10 years, any felony prosecution is dropped according to the law. So this is why they released him. But still, this was a very, very unpopular kind of decision. And there was a lot of outrage from across the spectrum. But there was quite a big and surprising silence from the biggest authorities, like from the prime minister and the president. No one mentioned anything. Diab didn't comment until a few days later on Twitter. He said something like, divine justice doesn't expire after 10 years, like, felonies prosecution, something really not very prime ministerial, to say the least. And no one wanted to claim responsibility. The FPM, the main party, the strongest party in government, didn't say anything. So everyone had their eyes on Amal and Hezbollah because they are the parties that kind of give the political umbrella to the head of the military court. This is what we know, at least, that, Hussein Abdullah, the head of the military court, or now the former head, because he's resigned, is affiliated or associated with Hezbollah and Amal. And both Hezbollah and Amal have released very strong statements condemning the decision. Amal said, it will oppose the decision. I don't know how. Hezbollah, the parliamentary bloc of Hezbollah, have released a strong statement that, condemned the decision and basically almost attacked the judges personally, saying, they should have resigned instead of doing this. They have, let go of their national duty, etc. So everyone was waiting for Nasrallah's speech. Nasrallah spoke Friday night, and he was basically, for most of the speech, he was just defending Hezbollah's position and trying to say, no, Hezbollah did not give the green light to this decision. And he was attacking some people who are considered to be close to Hezbollah, journalists or analysts or politicians that are close to Hezbollah but have criticized Hezbollah for not taking strong action against this decision and kind of trying to prevent it from happening. So a lot of people were waiting for the speech, but Nasrallah actually was a bit disappointing, in my opinion, because he said things that are quite ridiculous, like, that he got the news about Fakhoury being released from the media. He didn't know about it beforehand. Which
there's literally nobody who believes that, though. I mean, that's insane that he would not know this beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just not.
I mean, whether it's true or not, people are not going to believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. But what basically you understand from his speech, in my opinion, is that he basically said Hezbollah doesn't have the capacity or the willingness to force things on everyone else in the country. Even if Hezbollah is able to do that, it doesn't want to, because that's not how things work in Lebanon. So he was basically saying that, if our allies want something, sometimes you have to make compromises, and we can't force our will on them. And this is very interesting, right? Because, who are the most powerful people in government today? Who are the most powerful people on the commission that made the decision in the military court in terms of political affiliation or political backing? It's basically the FPM, Amal, and Hezbollah. So he's kind of blaming it on these very close allies, more or less, and saying, we can't do anything about it if they don't want to.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how, nobody really is taking responsibility, with the exception of Hussein Abdullah, who had to resign from his position as the head of the court. Which, another interesting thing, he's actually from Khiam originally, so apparently he is not well received back at home for making the decision to release Fakhoury. But he's gone, but he's just going to be replaced by somebody else. So nobody in the higher order of things, no, the Zulama, have taken any responsibility or anything like that, despite the fact that there was just this widespread backlash against this whole thing. Okay, well, the power is about to cut on us, and so we're going to have to wrap it up right there. Guys, it's been really interesting. I wish I could see you guys. I hope that everything is going well for you in your respective houses. Other than that, though, we're going to see how this goes, and hopefully we'll be back next week as well. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And Timour Azhari is somewhere out there. I think we lost him. And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast. Take care, everybody.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.